them. The Belleville Intelligencer is accusing you of using intimidation to get your point across. They say you threatened one of the reporters on Friday after they released a column critical of the blockade.
We removed one of the media people from the Belleville Intelligencer after he misrepresented a woman who carried out a business in our community and attempted to cast her in a light that she didn't support that. And so the issue for us was about justice for women and girls, and when he did that, that was the reason why he was expelled. He can have all the criticism in the world of what we were doing, but he could not bring one of our First Nations women into disrepute and to put her before the community and make suggestions as to what she thought
but, you know,
when they weren't true.
I've heard you said, get the F out of here before we have to send you a more direct message. That's apparently what you yelled.
That's exactly what I said.
All right, so are you threatening him?
I'm stating the very obvious.
3 Mohawk protesters, including Sean Brandt, the man in that clip, were charged on the weekend by Ontario Provincial Police during an occupation of CN rail tracks. They were protesting against how the federal government has rejected calls for a full public inquiry into murdered and missing Aboriginal women. Jason Miller is the Belleville intelligence reporter referenced in that CBC clip. He joins me now to discuss Brandt's comments. Jason, thanks very much for joining us today. I mean, what would you say now that you've heard Mr. Brandt's response to the situation?
Absolutely no facts to what Mr. Brandt is saying. If he's speaking to a Mohawk woman, who I've interviewed many, on the day, Tuesday before that incident, I actually interviewed several business people in the community who shared their thoughts on how the blockade along Shannonville Road was impacting them. One such lady shared thoughts, and I placed that in my article, and if she has any issues with that, she should have called me, and we could have addressed that. And if she wanted any part of it to be recanted or anything in terms of anything factual error, I could have had that addressed, but that was not the case. And Mr. Brandt did not address that when I got to the scene. What he addressed was my presence, and it was done in an aggressive manner, as you've seen.
Now, Jason, I just want to get this on the record here so people understand. I mean, I've looked back and I've read your stories. You are a reporter. You write down the facts. You take various sides of the story, and you're not an opinion columnist, are you? Not at all.
Not at all. And actually, I have a habit of not only taking notes, but recording a lot of the interviews, which I notify people that I am recording, and if I do so, they know of that. And so we could go through the facts, and if Mr. Brandt wants to have that debate, if he wants to sit down, I can prove to him that I at no point quoted anyone in any manner that they did not approve of, and the story is straightforward and factual.
Now, I understand there was a column in the Belleville Intelligencer, which just wasn't particularly praising of Mr. Brandt, but it also wasn't super negative, and I guess he had a problem with that and maybe thought because you were with the same paper that therefore you shouldn't be allowed to do your job. Is that sort of the backstory here?
Yes, exactly, and that was the sentiment that I gathered when I got to the scene. I mean, the first comment that came from any of the protesters there that approached me Friday afternoon was in relation to the comments that were written in that column by my former city editor, Chris Millette. And he has had long-standing relations with Mr. Brandt, back and forth wrangling over things that he's written in the past years. I mean, this isn't the first time. People should know that Mr. Brandt has been involved with protests in the community. There's been numerous occasions, and so Chris has been writing about him for years. And they had issues with that, and I have no problem with that. I mean, if you have an issue with a colleague of mine, share that. But then it became more of a personal thing when they decided to target me personally in relation to what Chris had written in his column a few days earlier.
Were there other media people on the scene who were, allowed to stay, in Mr. Brandt's view?
There were people, I think 2 television-related journalists there when I arrived. A Kingston reporter from CKWS was on scene, and there was another gentleman there as well. So they were setting up to start their interview when I arrived. They started taking some photos and prepare myself, because I was at that very area on Tuesday. I interviewed Mr. Brandt behind the barricades there, and let it be known that Mr. Brandt is an individual that I would suspect of any journalist in this area I have had the most contact with. I've been to his place of business. He's been into the newsroom and spoken with me on occasions. We've spoken on the phone. I know his wife. We've had discussions, and it was very shocking that he would have responded to me in that manner. I think that if he had an issue, he could have addressed it with me in a more straightforward way in terms of saying, Jason, I have issues with this story. Let's sit down and talk about it. If there's factual errors, let's have that addressed. And that's how I would have thought Mr. Brandt, a person that I respected, would have addressed the matter, but that was not the case on Friday.
Do you think this damages the Belleville media and the surrounding regions area's media ability to cover, Mr. Brandt? The fact that there's now, I mean, concerns for safety, I suppose?
I don't know how this is going to play out in the coming weeks and months. I know that in the past, when I just arrived at the paper around 2009 and I was given the beat to cover the Mohawk community there, that there was issues around how media had covered in the past and interactions between the media and certain groups of protesters, including Mr. Brandt. It did not impact my relationship with him at that point. When I arrived, he had noted to me that, we've had dealings with your entity in the past. It didn't impact our relationship up until Friday. And now I don't know. I don't know. We haven't spoken. I haven't made an attempt to call him. As you can understand, I'm somewhat in a little bit of a position here when it pertains to what will happen in the next coming days, depending on what my superiors advise me to do. But if it is to reach out to Mr. Brandt, I will. I have no issues with calling him and addressing the matter. And if he decides to speak to me, I will answer his call and we will have a discussion. That's what it's about. If he wants to talk about any issues to do with coverage, we can have that discussion. That's what I'm here for. And if someone has an issue with what I've written in any way, I am open to having that talk, because my job is to make sure that people can understand the issues in the community. I'm there to share facts, and part of that involves visiting the community and doing proper coverage. So if me speaking with him or any other protesters can open that window and allow me to be back in the community, I'm more than open to that. But if that's not the case, then we'll have to just see how that plays out in the coming months.
I agree with you in that I don't have a problem with anybody having an issue with something that I've said. For instance, I'm an opinion columnist, so by all means, criticize me to no end. But we had a situation just a few months ago when a Sun Media reporter in New Brunswick had a similar altercation with the Elsipogtog protests. I know there are different situations there. We're out of time, Jason, but I want to thank you very much for stopping by and giving us an update on this. Good luck in covering your beat.
Thank you very much for having me.